Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping B2B High Ticket Service Providers Grow with one lesson at a time. As you know, whenever we find a consultant that is worth sharing with the rest of the community, we do an interview and we're trying to see how they can help you specifically. So for today, I actually have Punit Bhatia, who is coming from Belgium, and he has some really interesting stories to share and some really exciting experience. The topic for today is expanding to the EU. So any other companies from the US or from the rest of the world that are intending to expand to the EU, they should listen to this podcast. And the focus is not just how to expand it, but it's more toward the compliance and more toward the privacy, the data, and the AI compliance. That's all I'm gonna say for today because I wanted Punit to actually share the insights. So Punit, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dancho, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is all mine, Punit, because we had the opportunity to talk multiple times before this recording. So I was really inspired on what you guys are doing. And maybe before we dive into the expanding to the EU and the compliance angle, I think it would be a good idea if you could spend some time and introduce yourself and give us the who is Punit actually.
So, Punit or Punit Bhatia, as people call me, I'm an engineer, I'm an MBA, and with that background, I started in 1999 with engineering background, got into IT, then into project management, program management, and eventually after MBA, I was into MBA in 2010, I was into this aspect of business side. So let's say the digital data, IT sourcing, vendor management. And then
Mm.
eventually I came in touch with GDPR when it was happening. And then the privacy thing happened. And then I saw a gap in the market saying there was too many people asking questions about GDPR or data management and right now about AI and how to govern AI. And I said, okay, if there's so many people asking, how about helping them and becoming a consultant? And that's when I started my journey in 2017 by writing a few books and eventually in 2019 becoming a freelance person. As a person, that's my professional journey. But on the personal side, I'm based in Belgium, Brussels. I like to make things simple as a person, whether it's job, whether it's life. I like to keep things simple, and that's what helps me in my job also because I can easily understand, arrange, structure, organize, and get things done in a very simple manner. And that's where I differentiate from most privacy AI governance people because it's compliance with law that can be complicated for people
Yeah.
and it's legalistic, and I make it simple and link it to their business. And in my life, I also use that skill of making things simple into philosophy aspect or what is life, why do we behave like what we behave. So I also have that side which I like to talk about. How do we do what we do and why do we do what we do as humans?
Yeah, thank you, Punit. And as I'm listening to you, I was like, yeah, when GDPR was introduced, I mean, I come from Macedonia, so we are also non-EU country. And when was that? 2018, 2017, when the GDPR was introduced, we were all confused, especially companies that are outside from the EU. We were like, well, what are we supposed to do now? And it's a pity that I didn't know you then because we also hired a GDPR consultant to help us with the compliance because we did work a lot with the EU clients. And especially living in Belgium, you actually know firsthand what is happening, what are the changes, and what it should happen. So, for a company coming from the outside EU, how did GDPR affect us?
Well, the beauty of GDPR, or for that matter, the EU AI Act, which has come up recently, is it does not matter where you are based. So you may be a company based in the US, having no offices in EU, and processing or serving the clients in EU. So in the today's digital world, you have a website which is being accessed by someone in EU. So EU citizen or EU resident, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
And as on that website, you collect some data and process some data. If it's personal data being processed, the GDPR applies. If your website is using some AI logic and giving them some service like these conversation recorders or transcribers or meeting minute makers. All these are AI based. Then the EU AI Act applies. Of course, if you are making notes, making minutes, it's both the GDPR and both the AI Act. So both these things apply irrespective of wherever you are based, as long as you're serving a person, an entity in the EU. And that's where it makes complex.
Yes, I see. So what you're saying that even if the company has nothing to do with EU, if it has EU people visiting their website and they store some of the data, GDPR still affects them.
That's absolutely true, and you would have noticed, or at least those in the field of privacy, especially in the EU, noticed some of the websites in the US and in India and some other countries stopped
Mhm.
accessibility to EU people because they didn't want to take the extra effort of compliance with GDPR and said, when they check the IP address from EU, they say this website is not available in your region. And I'm talking about some news websites early on.
Ooh, wow. And I'm curious, are there penalties with the GDPR?
Well, it always goes with the carrot and a stick approach. So, yes, there are penalties. With the GDPR, it's 4% of your global turnover or 20 million euros.
Mm.
So,
Wait,
which is big,
4%.
which is very big because and it's the higher of the two. So if you're a company earning 1 million a year and you think okay 20% will be 200K, let's take a chance. That's not the way because you'll still be liable for 20 million max minimum. So of course that's the highest fine, 4% or the 20%, 20 million, and it's of the global revenue. It's not the local revenue in EU.
It's not just from the EU citizens that we're using, but as an entity. Wow, that's actually scary. And is it hard legislation and compliance to set up by the companies?
If you understand it, it's simple, but if you don't, then it can be complex. But I say it's not as simple as you go to Google or ChatGPT, ask what to do, write some notices, and say it's done. That's not the right way of doing it.
Yes, it's done until you get the fine, and then you were like, I should have had a consultant in the first place.
Yes, so the idea is to do it right, and you need to get somebody knowledgeable, and it's not huge, and it's based on the company size and something else. Let's take two examples. Let's say there's a company serving a news website from say US or India or China,
Hmm.
and it's accessible from EU. Then you're not collecting or asking people too much information unless you have cookies or things like that or trackers on your website. Then compliance is simpler. Before you activate those trackers, you ask and you put a privacy and a cookie notice. So life is simple. It's not huge complexity. But if you are a AI agent who wants to help companies transcribe their meetings, then you're accessing audio information, you are accessing personal information. This is Dancho, this is Punit, and you're making some correlations and analysis. Then there are restrictions on what you can do and what you cannot do. And then the complexity or implementation becomes slightly larger. I usually tell my clients, say, they ask me this question in terms of numbers because they say how much would it cost, because everybody wants to figure out where am I tell them anywhere between 1000 and 100 million, because I worked in a company which had 50 million or 60 million of spending on GDPR versus I've seen 1000. And I tell them then in your case, because by talking to the person I can usually say how much it is, and usually I say you'll be more towards the left rather than right, so it won't be 100 million for you, but it won't be 1000 for you either, but somewhere in the middle, and let's talk and then we find out.
Yeah, depends on the complexity, but there are companies that are paying 100 million. That should be a very complicated company. But of course, on the other hand, if the penalty is 4% from the overall revenue, then you are like, yeah, we need to pay for it. And Punit, I was also curious. I mean, as a consultant, you also mentioned beyond the GDPR was the AI Act. That was like 2020 something. Was it 2021, 2020, around that time? What changes did that bring now to the compliance world?
So GDPR was all about personal data, that is
Yeah.
data of people. And then with the AI coming in, people have been talking about what will happen to all data, what are the risks does it create, like Remember in COVID days, cameras could automatically scan and make a picture of you, keep a profile, then keep your face ID. So those things create triggered some concern. And then in 21, you're right, they started this conversation on should we have an AI Act? The GDPR covers automated processing, but they said AI Act. Then in August 24, they finalized or ratified a law called EU AI Act, which takes care of what do companies need to do if they're using AI systems. And there, it's not same like GDPR, but very similar when it comes to penalties, very similar when it comes to extraterritorial or say
Mhm.
companies who are not based in EU application. That's similar, but it's not all or nothing. GDPR is it applies in full to all companies if you process personal data. EUA Act, it's risk based. So based on the risk you create, then the element of compliance or the level of compliance would be gradually higher.
I see, I see. So if you don't make that big risks, then the compliance it's easier. But of course, same as you said, from 1,000 to 100 million, depending on what kind of complexity are you trying to address. And I was just curious, Punit, for companies from the USA. I mean, yeah, they didn't have GDPR, but I assume in the US they had some data privacy compliance. I'm trying to understand the differentiation between EU and the US. And if they were compliant with the local US compliance laws, is it a lot of changes to be made into the GDPR? And the second angle is also for the AI. In the EU, I know about the AI Act. Is there anything similar into the USA?
Now that's many questions in one, so let me take
Yeah,
one by
sorry.
one.
I'm curious to understand
No,
how it
no,
works.
it's a good question and it's a loaded question, but let me take first the GDPR.
Hmm.
So before 1995, the EU, every country had its own law. Then in 1995, the EU put a directive and said each country should align with this. But then directive, as most people know in the legal field, it's just saying a recommendation. That's how you should do it. But then they came up with the GDPR in 2016 saying this is the way to do it. Everybody in 27 member states has to do like this in EU. So there's a single harmonized structured approach. And of
Yeah,
course, you will notice between 1975 and 2020, things have changed. There's Facebook, there's Google, there's Apple, and all the new companies. So data is processed differently. So harmonization and modernization were the two key aspects of GDPR. In the US, we have state-based laws like California has CCPA, New York has its own law, and all other states have their own law. But they have not taken the step of harmonizing. When it
uh-huh.
comes to California and New York, they have taken steps to modernize in some other states. So there has been modernization, but not harmonization. And then the extent, I mean, US typically tends to be innovation or business centric, and EU tends to be human centric or society centric. So those dimensions also bring in how complex, how certain, and how stricter the law is. And that same principle also applies to AI, because that was also your question. So AI,
Yes.
EU has this EU AI Act, which is the EU law, and of course, each country
Harmonized.
can make it stricter locally. And but in the US right now there is no AI law that I'm aware of, but there are a few executive orders and state level orders or state level legislations which are applicable in some states, not every state, and that's work in progress. However, OECD, the group of
Yeah.
countries, has published saying responsible AI guidelines, and that's aligned with the EU AI Act.
Yeah, for me, guidelines and, and law is different because guidelines is nice to have.
Yeah.
Law is 4% penalty on the revenue. That hurts much more. But if I understand you right, actually, the difference EU versus USA is that EU is more aligned across all the countries, while in the US they have across aligned guidelines, but however, the rules are more on a per country level.
Upper state level, and then some are stricter, some are less stricter, and they are not none of the rules except for, I mean, at a broad level, very generic statement, CCPA in California are as strict as GDPR.
I see. I see. So, but that is a good information, Punit. So that actually opened the door for different questions for me because I'm like, okay, so what should we do? I mean, if we are companies coming from the US or coming from Macedonia, like it or not, it's a website. People from EU will start coming in. We all utilize some degree of AI in our businesses. I mean, if you in 2025 already, I mean, every business should have some degree, either some chatbots, either some AI or chat GPT in place. So what are the steps? What should we do actually? Or is there a framework that we can follow, or a framework that you follow in your consultancy work that we can understand, or maybe even call you to help us out? But what would be the process for a company that is like, oh my God, we need the GDPR slash AI compliance? What should we do?
So we have over the time created our own steps and methodology, which is
Mm,
very much aligned to ISO standards like 27001 or 42001, which are the standards for privacy and AI, and of course the GDPR and the AI Act. And
mhm.
very simply, what we do is like, let's say you are running a company in the US and want to come into EU. Now, technically, you need to be compliant with all the laws in the US and then in the EU. And it's a complex exercise. Reason being, you don't want to say, now we are expanding to California, let's do the CCPA. Now we are expanding to New York, let's do that. Now we are expanding to, and that's not going to work because it's going to be all the time working on compliance. So what we do is we do an analysis with the client and say which are the regions you are in and which are the regions you want to be in next 10 years. Like one of my clients wanted to be in Australia, EU, and US, and Canada. I said, okay, that's
Oof.
fine.
Oof. That's a tough one. A side question, just Australia has their own privacy and
Yes,
AI
they
Act?
do. Yes, they do. Canada has its own. So what we do is, but there's a beauty of it. There's a strictest law, stricter law, and strict law, and an easy law. I mean, simple language.
Hmm.
So we say, let's take the strictest law, like the GDPR.
Yeah.
Then you make a strategy that is what, and we create a policy for them because we don't want them to read the hundreds of pages of GDPR and start making sense. Every employee has to read it. So we take that as a company and make it into a policy of 10, 12, 15 pages, how much detail they want to go, sometimes 5 pages also. So this is what your company is going to do. This is the policy, and that you will implement across all countries, all regions. So, and you go proudly saying we implement the strictest standard of this policy based on EU GDPR, and we incorporate if they are in California, if they are in Canada, if they are in Australia, any exceptions.
Yeah.
That becomes the policy, that's what they implement. So that's the strategy part of it. Then we help them with implementation, saying how do you put this into practice. Then there is the training dimension of it, training the management and training the people. Usually we train the management upfront because if they don't know what we are talking, they are very lost or confused, and we train them before we even build a strategy so that the vocabulary is same. But the staff we train later. And then once it's in place, the business keeps changing and laws also. So the idea is to keep in touch with the laws, keep in touch with the business, and any changes you have to do, we call it operations management. So we do all that, all the four steps: the planning, the strategy, the implementation of policy, the training of staff, which is every year has to be done, and also the operations management. And then at a certain point, if they are big enough, like one of our clients grew exponentially and they said we want to hire our own people, so we transitioned
Yeah.
back the
Put
operations
in-house.
management to them. And another aspect of this approach is once it's done, then you go into a new region. Let's say they want to expand into India, then we study Indian law and say, do you need to change anything to the policy? And remember, since you implement the strictest standard, the changes would be very limited.
I see. So that's actually a good point. Rather than applying yourself to five different regions with five different privacy policy, you're taking the strictest one, and that usually incorporates all the weakest standards. Of
Yeah.
course, there might be some small, unique, incremental changes that needs to be applied, but generally, if the GDPR is the strictest, you apply that one, and by default, you cover 90% of all the countries, and then you just tailor it like Australia. They might have a small change that needs to be applied, but that's only small change rather than building new policies for every region that you're going through.
Yeah, and I give you an example of that. I was working in a large bank which had operations in about 60, 70 countries. And there's a requirement saying you have to publish a privacy notice on your website saying what does it do, what data you collect. Now, each of our 70 countries had 4 to 5 notices or 2 to 3 notices, one for retail banking, one for wholesale banking, one for this and that and that and that. When the GDPR came, and with this approach of standardization, we took it centrally. We created one privacy notice and sent it to all countries. Of course, it took us 1 year because there were 50 or 60 lawyers working on the same thing, looking at each and every word, and we have to satisfy all requirements. But when we created it, we sent it to all countries and saying, use this as a basis. If you need to add a paragraph, we templatized it. Please add at the bottom or the start or the middle, and that's the notice. Now imagine the customer experience. So somebody in Vietnam or Korea versus somebody in Belgium versus somebody in US, anywhere the client reads, they get the same experience with the client, because what does a bank do? They provide you banking services.
Yeah.
Now, why should it be so complex in one country versus other country? So that standardization makes life simple, and it's just one example of a privacy notice. There's the same thing we did with the healthcare company in US. They were operating in multiple regions, and they were thinking we'll have a California notice, Canada notice, Singapore notice, Australian notice, and in India notice, and so on. An EU notice, of course. Don't miss EU because that's the trigger. And then we said, no, one notice with clauses or saying if you are from California, this is what applies to you. And that's the simplicity that comes in.
Yeah, but that's actually providing clarity rather than getting yourself stuck into multiple laws, multiple acts, and multiple things. You are trying to make it simple then for the companies.
Yeah, and even for you as a user, let's say you are visiting a website, you're buying a tool, and you go to their website and they say, if you are from EU, read this. If you are from Canada, read this. You're like, okay, but why are they giving me a different experience if I'm based in different country?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true, Punit. And okay, usually, how long does this process take? Is it something that, okay, I need it, hi Punit, let's do it. Tomorrow you come back, it's done, or it's 6 months, 9 months in order to become compliant?
It's a very good question. And the answer is same as the financial one.
Depends.
No, I mean, of course it depends, but it's based on the complexity or size and the amount of data processing. But typically it takes between 3 months to 2 years for any company. And I always tell them you will never be GDPR compliant, because when you say compliant, that means it's done. I don't have to do anything, and next day business will change. You can be GDPR ready, EU AI Act ready. That means you've done the basics, you are in control of things. There are few actions done, critical ones, and few actions in progress. So being GDPR ready, typically in 9 to 12 months, we are able to do it with clients. And
Yeah.
then basically having a basic infrastructure in place. And some companies which have a simple website, nothing more to do, then it's 2 or 3 months because still it goes back and forth. That's the timeline, but
Yeah.
don't look at it as a project which will get done. Look at it as an activity.
Ongoing.
Like I'm
Ongoing.
working with a healthcare client. We started in 2021. We have implemented most of the things, but I'm still their active operations or privacy manager. And we meet every 2 weeks and discuss what are the things to do. And we have an action log to follow up or risk log to follow up.
I see. No, but you actually answered my question because if it's between 3 months and 2 years, it's not really a chat GPT prompt that you can set it up and just be compliant. But aside Kristen, then Punit, are there a lot of companies that are like, you know what, I don't really intend of implementing it. I just need to have a policy to put it on my website. I mean, I know it's unethical, but someone asked me to have compliance, GDPR. Let me put something on my website. We are GDPR compliant. This is how we collect. This is how we process data. Put it on the website, but without actually making it. Because when I was listening to you, you're like, yeah, actually, the steps that you provided about I'm taking notes here, about the strategy, about the implementation, and then even training the people to be the company compliant. Some people are kind of skipping those steps and like, okay, we have the policy, it's on our website, and that's it. And the question was that will not work for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, if you get audited, it still you still won't be compliant. You just have a piece of paper. But are there a lot of companies that are actually looking for that? It's like, Punit, we don't need the whole thing. We just need some paper that we can show off.
Unfortunately, yes, there are companies like that because it's not to do with them wanting to avoid compliance, it's them not understanding the enormity of the situation and the applicability of risk. So
Mhm.
because of the ignorance, let's call it like that, they are like, let's not do it. That's one. And sometimes it's also a little bit of carefree or careless attitude saying, we don't mind. And I have learned over the years not to chase or guide them. Because if you are not serious, if you're not caring, and if you're not understanding, it's not for law, it's also for your customers. Because when you are in breach, like Yahoo was in breach, and there was huge publicity, and they had to send emails, and stock fell down, and all those things. If you are thinking you can take it easy, then be there. Because convincing somebody to take action when they're not convinced is the hardest part in life. So I don't do that. So I that's why we changed our motto to saying those who care about trust. So if you care about trust of your consumers and want to keep that and care about trust of your stakeholders and regulators, then we are here to help you create and build and keep that trust on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think that was exactly my question because uh, some people treat GDPR as a piece of paper or the AI compliance. It's like, is it a piece of paper, put it in a drawer and forget about it? We are compliant. But after this conversation, I've realized that it's not about the paper. It's about going through the process to understand how you really operate as a business. And then the GDPR is actually more not a guideline, it's a strict, but to tell you how to do it better. And I just looked up your LinkedIn cover photo. It's really for those who care about digital trust. So now when you said our motto is for those who care about digital trust, I'm realizing is that if someone just needs a piece of paper, they don't really want to be GDPR compliant. They just want a piece of paper. What you're really offering, Punit, is that companies that really believe that this will add value to their business and they really want to not just let's hire some external freelancer or a consultant, let's do it for us, but let's hire a consultant to help us in the process so we can incorporate the GDPR across the business.
Absolutely. And that's been our philosophy and that's been our learning because in 2018-19, when I set it up, I was going to a lot of companies and they were having multiple meetings trying to explain them why they should do it and they coming with hundreds of reasons why they shouldn't do it
Yeah,
and
well,
then giving me 100 examples of other companies who have not done it. So if you are in that mindset, I think stay happy where you are, and if becomes a problem, come to me.
yeah, no, true. And I completely understand because I'm also a business owner and usually the compliance is a headache and we're all like, I have a business to run. This compliance is slowing me down. But the underlying value is that becoming the compliant is not just for to say to the EU, yeah, we are GDPR compliant, but it's actually to ensure that you have trust and that you have the right data and that you process them the right way. So there would be also security. There wouldn't be any security concerns as well.
Exactly. It's about, let's say, when you go out of your house, you don't say, let's not lock it. You know the lock can be broken. You know anybody can still come via the back door, break the door, and all that. But you put a lock, you take, and you don't leave the key there. I know some people leave the key, but for different reasons. But then you make sure still you lock it. You go out, and some people put alarms, and then some people put cameras. Now it's the assets you have, you want to protect them. And in a company, the assets are data and your customers. And when your customers are your assets, you collect their data, and that data you want to protect. And how do you protect it? That's what the GDPR is all about.
Yeah, it is actually tips and tricks on how to make sure that the data is protected. And it's no longer tips and tricks, but it's mandatory because companies will not use it until it's enforced. I
Yeah.
see. Punit, I'm also looking at the time. We should start wrapping up this episode. I was just curious. I mean, I ask everybody the same question toward the end. Is like if you have to share one single lesson about the privacy and the compliance, that like a main takeaway or the golden nugget from this episode, what would be that?
I think the one thing I've learned over the years is companies come to me and say, when should we start?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're like, we are making a plan. 2 years from now, we will launch in Australia or EU. Should we think about GDPR? Should we think about privacy compliance? And my answer is start as soon as you start thinking of expanding into EU, because it takes, as we discussed, anywhere between 3 months to 2 years, or sometimes 9 to 12 months to get your GDPR ready. So if you start early, you have the advantage, because you don't want, you come to the EU or you have your business plans ready, and then you come in touch with me and you say, I tell you 9 to 12 months and it's too late. So start early and start thinking about privacy compliance. It's not an option, it's a trust you want to have from your clients. And that's what it is all about, because that's a brand creation, and brand is about trust, and trust is when customers trust you.
I see. I see. So even if you're not planning on expanding, if you're a new startup, it should be incorporated into the business plan. It's
Yes.
like it's much easier to embed it into the planning stage rather than then later figure out how to change the business in order to become more compliant.
Yeah, that's true. That's very well said.
Nice, nice, Punit. Punit, I'm just interested for everybody that is actually listening, if they want to reach out to you, where people can find you. For example, if they have any additional privacy, AI, data related compliance questions, or even if they are considering entering into the EU market into mid or long term plans, where can people find you?
So if people are really interested in working with us or connecting with me for information, not just working, even wanting to connect for any conversation, the best channel is LinkedIn. So just search my name, Punit Bhatia, and I'm usually on the first page. But if you search privacy, then of course you find me much easier. But if you are just exploring privacy and saying, I want to know a bit more but don't want to talk yet, then the YouTube channel can also be fit for privacy. YouTube channel can be an interesting option. There are a few videos wherein people can familiarize themselves with the GDPR and AI Act concepts.
I see. Well, actually, I don't know if you've mentioned it as well that the company that you own is the Fit for Privacy, fitforprivacy.com. So what I'll do is below this video, I'll actually set up the links to your LinkedIn account and to the website because I saw you have a lots of resources to offer. I saw that you have some courses available, some books available, videos, podcasts. So you are talking a lot on the subject of privacy. And that's why I really wanted to invite you, Punit, because I thought that you have some really good insights on the compliance things that I was personally curious to ask you because as much as we want as a business owners, we cannot specialize in everything. And in these cases, compliance and data, I really think that I would rather have consultants to not just sort it out, but to keep an eye on it for me rather than me, on a weekly or on a monthly basis. I need to see, and if it's an act, then they have amendments and they have changes in the laws and everything. And since you're doing it, I think it's a much better return of investment for me to just have a consultant rather than trying to figure it out on my own.
No, that's very well said. I think regarding people looking to get in touch, on our website, there's a free course also for GDPRs.
Mm-hmm.
Some entrepreneurs who don't have the budgets or who just want to learn what is it all about. We do have a 30-minute free course that you can do and get familiarized with GDPR. So anytime we are here to help. And it's been a pleasure, Dancho, to be with you. Always a pleasure, not just in this one. Whenever I speak to you, I'm always impressed with the work you are doing and the value you're adding to entrepreneurs or consultants, helping them grow, helping them sell.
Yeah, that's the mission. Thank you, Punit. As you have the mission for those that care about digital trust, for us, the mission is to help as many businesses as possible to grow because that's how we all grow as a community.
Yeah.
Punit, I want to thank you very much for coming on this show. I think you've provided some really good insights. For me, I mean, I'm still an old school guy. I still take notes as you speak. So I just wanted to look at my golden nuggets that I actually got it from this conversation. And the one thing that stand out, few things stand out from me, but the one thing was that, yeah, you don't need to be in EU to have to be GDPR and AI compliant. So even if you are a US company, if you have EU people coming in and if you collect some data, you have to be compliant. Then I really like the idea of how what's the differentiation between EU and USA. Like EU is more aligned across countries, and in the US it's a per country clarifications. And the process that you had, I mean, from the strategy part with the analysis and how to do it, I really like the part about, well, let's figure out which is the strictest way. That's actually a good strategy. Let's find the strictest law, let's comply to it, and then figure out how to do the rest. And I really think that it helped me better understand that this compliance is not just a one-time thing, but it's an ongoing thing that all of companies we need to comply in order to make the world safer actually.
Absolutely. I think you become a good person who understands our business. So you can now go and sell for us.
That's true. That's true. Punit, thank you again very much. And for everybody out there that is listening to this, think about compliance. Yeah, it's a tough pill to swallow because we are always focused either sales, either business and product development. However, if you want the privacy, the data, and the AI compliance, start reading about it, get in touch with Punit. We'll leave the contact information just below this video. And for everybody out there, do have a great day. We continue with our show as we find other consultants with different golden nuggets that they have to share. We'll just come back and continue from here. Do have a great day. And Punit, thank you very much again for
Thank
coming.
you, Rancho.